All right, hi everybody. We're just going to get started. Thanks so much for taking the time to be here. I guess I should close that door. Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Fabulous. Welcome everybody. This is our second annual Atlantic Caucus meeting, so hopefully you found yourselves in the right place. We had the great pleasure of leading this conversation last year as well at CAEH. And it was a fabulous, lively discussion, really casual. We're hoping to kind of host this as more of a conversation rather than a kind of a presentation style of panel discussion. So I guess just quickly we'll start by introducing ourselves. So my name is Jen Crow. I'm the Executive Director of Choices for Youth in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. We're an organization focused on ending youth homelessness, and I'm also a regional director with the Canadian Housing Renewal Association. And maybe I'll pass it over to Doug. We're kind of co-moderating, and then we'll pass it over to our panelists.
Yeah, thanks for geez, it's too loud. Thanks for joining, everybody. My name is Doug Plasson. I'm the Executive Director with End Homelessness St. John's. We serve as a system planning organization for our community, and we deliver on the federal government's Reaching Home program for St. John's. And I'm also on the board of directors for CAEH.
Perfect. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Bly, and I'm a city councillor in the city of Vancouver, and also a director on our regional board of Metro Vancouver, and most recently, as of last Monday, the president of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And FCM represents 2,100 member municipalities across the country, certainly in the Atlantic as well, so really happy to be here.
Janet?
Great, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Janet Golding, and I'm the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister at Housing, Infrastructure, and Communities. Can everyone hear me? And so I'm responsible for the Housing and Homelessness Policy and Program branch there, so supporting Minister Fraser in the Canada's Housing Plan, as well as working really closely with CMHC, as they still remain the really primary delivery arm of all of our housing programming across the country. So really pleased to be here this afternoon.
Fabulous. Okay, thanks so much, folks. So for this conversation today, we thought we would really seed it around an ask that was made by our 4 Atlantic housing ministers back in April of 2024. And it was a $500 million request to invest in specifically Atlantic solutions to increasing housing stock and addressing homelessness across the Atlantic region. So Doug and I kind of were taking a look at that and thinking a little bit about like what do the issues look like in the Atlantic region? What are some of the unique concerns? And we want to hear a little bit from you fine folks about what you're experiencing in your communities, but also what are some of the solutions that are really working in an Atlantic context? We were just kind of talking a little bit before we started, and certainly some of the pieces that we experience in our own province is that municipalities don't have the authority to own and operate housing outside of St. John's, our urban center. One of the things that we're also experiencing are issues around municipal infrastructure that, sometimes there's the will, sometimes there's the housing infrastructure funding to build and a lack of municipal infrastructure to support it. And in other cases, and certainly aligned with kind of some of the themes of this conference, there might be an investment on capital for housing, but a lack of investment on supportive services and wraparound services that are needed to support the most vulnerable. So those are just some pieces, certainly from a youth homelessness perspective, that we encounter every day in our kind of mission to build more affordable, supportive housing. And I think one of the pieces certainly that we heard loud and clear at last year's AtlanticCaucus meeting was that there needs to be more alignment across all levels of government and also more alignment with the community sector in terms of how we really address this. And sometimes those different streams of funding and supports don't necessarily complement each other. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in this conversation. And Doug, I don't know if you kind of want to speak as well to your perspective before we get into it.
Yeah, no, it's very similar, Jen, in terms of what we're thinking about is we hear it all the time from each level of government that we need to work together, but it's trying to find those common areas where we can see the best ways to optimize resources to get the best outcomes possible. And even just in our chat as we were getting started. We were, nodding our heads that, yeah, we need more alignment of resources. And that's kind of where we want to talk to folks about and get your perspectives on as well, because the Atlantic context is not too dissimilar from other jurisdictions, but it is a whole region that has been missing out on tens of millions of dollars in federal funding and provincial funding and in getting better outcomes for people. So that's really the sort of the purpose of this conversation, is to make sure that the Atlantic region is on the top of mind for the federal government as well.
So in terms of structure for this conversation, again, our goal is to make it as kind of conversational as possible. So what we are thinking is we'll probably pose just a kind of a warm-up question to each of our wonderful panelists, and then throw it over to you folks in terms of what are some of the things that you're seeing, experiencing, and or questions that you may have for our representatives of federal government, but also of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So Doug, I'll just start if that's okay. Perfect. Okay. So the first question is for you, Janet, and it's really around, how is the Department of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities working to align resources with regional needs, and of course in our context, Atlantic regional needs, especially considering the unique challenges that we're seeing across the Atlantic region. So, you are of course responsible for ensuring that funding is allocated in an equitable way across the whole country, but also recognizing that there are needs that are specific to certain regions. How is the federal government working to kind of acknowledge and align based on that?
For sure. So,
I'll move this back over.
yeah, thanks for the question, and there's a lot there to unpack. So maybe I'll just start with homelessness, and then I'll move to housing. So on the homelessness side, as I'm sure all of you are familiar with, Reaching Home is our federal homelessness program. The federal government has doubled its investment in Reaching Home since the start of the pandemic, and has recently announced some new funding to sort of deal with what we call that funding cliff that was coming for the last 2 years of the program. So many of you who rely on that funding know that the funding right now is available until 27-28, and we did have a big gap in the last 2 years of the program, which the government filled in budget 2024, and those of you who are recipients should be getting news of your allocations very shortly in terms of those last 2 years. So really pleased to be able to extend that. But as you know, Reaching Home is very much a community-based program, and it's designed that way to allow community entities in Atlantic Canada and across the country to really be able to focus the funding on their specific needs. Most recently, too, in Budget 2024, the government announced $250 million to address the issue of unsheltered homelessness and encampments specifically. So that funding is available this fiscal year and next fiscal year, and it was a deliberate decision made to work with the provinces, hopefully with the idea of actually bringing all three levels of government together into this conversation. So one of the things that, a couple of things I guess I would say about the encampments initiative. One, we know that $250 million is not enough to solve the problem across the country, so we wanted to take a very targeted approach in how we delivered that funding. But two, the funding was to be cost matched by provinces and territories to maximize the input, so making that $250 million investment more of a $500 million investment over 2 years. And so we have been working with provinces and territories over the summer. We're working very hard to put in place contribution agreements and working with them to identify communities who will receive the funding and be able to act quickly to be able to address the issue of encampments or unsheltered homelessness in their communities. The idea behind it, though, was really just to recognize that without PT support, so some of the things that you just referred to, they hold a lot of the levers around social services and wraparound supports, without community buy-in, because communities also, or municipalities, hold a lot of the levers on how encampments are managed in their communities. Really having all three levels of government working together in that space was an important design feature. And then, of course, engagement with the people who are impacted. So very much a strong emphasis on engaging those individuals living in the encampments, as well as Indigenous partners. As we all know that across the country, our Indigenous population is generally overrepresented in this space. So I think that was sort of one attempt, and those negotiations are coming hopefully really closely to a close. We're about, I think, to announce today our first agreement with one of the territories, and we're hoping that all other jurisdictions will follow suit very quickly. Some challenges, of course, with provincial elections kind of just wrapping up, underway, moving forward, and I'm sure many of you may have seen the press release by Minister Fraser last week about wanting to move more quickly in some jurisdictions, and in Ontario in particular, we've had some direction to work directly with some municipalities, but for Atlantic Canada, still working with our provincial counterparts there and working through them to really be able to have a targeted impact in this particular initiative. So maybe then switching really briefly to housing. So yeah, affordable housing I think is a challenge across the country, and as many of you will know, the National Housing Strategy and the new housing plan has a number of tools that are available to every community and every jurisdiction across Canada. And so I think one of the features that came out of Budget 2024 in the housing plan was an initiative called Canada Builds. And Canada Builds is less of sort of a, it's more of a concept than an actual program, but the idea is to work with jurisdictions across the country to see where we can work together to leverage the tools that are available both federally and provincially to make an impact in this space. So from the federal level, we'll talk about a number of CMHC programs that I'm sure you're familiar with, but first is the apartment construction loan program, so a loan program to provide low-interest financing for multi-unit buildings is kind of an anchor to this program, but it's not the only piece. I think it's a bit of a model based on BC and the agreement we were able to put in place with BC that leverages their financing facility, federal financing facility through the apartment construction loan program, but as well as things like public land and contribution funding that the BC government brought to the table. So the idea of leveraging the apartment construction loan program is based on that, but there are other important tools such as the Affordable Housing Fund, which is a combination of loans and contribution funding, the new cooperative housing program, which just launched, and there was a window that just closed, but there will be another application window opening in the new year. And just on that too, and thinking about sort of capacity and differing capacity across the country, we also complementary to that program is an agreement with the CHF, I always get this, the Cooperative Housing Federation. There we go, the Cooperative Housing Federation, to do things like capacity building and to help organizations get ready to actually put those applications in and be more successful. So also hearing very clearly from communities that capacity is a challenge and having to piece together applications to get to the full amount that you need is challenging, and so trying to do more in that space as well as we move forward. And then maybe the last thing I would just mention, which I think is of interest and really came through in that conversation with Minister Fraser in January, was the really big focus in Atlantic Canada on innovation and wanting to think about how we can leverage innovation to build faster, to build smarter, and to build affordably. And so factory-built housing and prefabrication is a priority there. And so many of you will be aware that the government has launched a process to strike an industrial strategy for home building. One of the, I think, the most tangible things that have started there is the housing design catalog. And so that housing design catalog, CMHC put out a request for proposals, and a design team was identified to sort of work across the country to think about regional designs, and so there is a regional impact there. And I had the name of I'll get the name of the organization that's representing Atlantic Canada when I get a little break here, but I'm going to stop there. I'm going to stop there. I put out a lot of information, so happy to respond to any questions.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those remarks. And just to kind of build off of that, I think, and I kind of want to pick your brain on this, Rebecca, a little bit. One of the pieces that, you've listed a lot of really great investment that's been made by the federal government, specifically on the infrastructure side, but also on the support side. You named like doubling, for example, the budget around reaching home. One of the things that we've heard a lot, we see a lot in our own communities, but we hear a lot across the province, is this kind of tension point between being able to attack the immediate issue around homelessness, solutions around encampments, shelters, that kind of thing, and also balancing that with the need to invest in long-term affordable and in some cases supportive housing too. So first of all, thank you so much, Janet, for kind of shedding a light on what is available right now through the federal government. And we're going to talk more about that, but I want to go to you, Rebecca, to get your thoughts a little bit around, Federation of Canadian Municipalities is representing, local governments right across this country. And what are your suggestions, or what are you hearing from members in terms of where federal funding should be directed in order to have an impact on the long-term needs around affordable housing and, a long-term end to homelessness? What are some of the solutions and the recommendations that are coming from your members?
Thanks very much. And I just would like to start by really thanking the federal government for the real focus on this issue. And in Budget 2024, there were a number of highlighted funds and commitments that we're seeking to address these challenges. So I think it goes without saying, even just in the list of all the programs, there's a lot of work being done on this file, and we appreciate it. We're hearing from members and other data that's been collected as recently as within the last 2 months, that housing and homelessness is really at the top of the list for concerns amongst municipal elected officials across the country. And when you think about how many people that is and who they represent, it's basically all citizens across the country. It's the concern of Canadians, not just elected officials. Top of mind, housing and homelessness. So I'd start there. When I think about, responses to encampments and homelessness, of course, funding and programs, and I don't mean to be trite, but I think it goes without saying that housing is a solution to homelessness. Housing is a solution to encampment. So I think we just have to keep coming back there, especially there's so many incredible people at this conference that are working on all of these different programs and frontline services. But if we can really work together to address, as you say, that supportive, that next level out of homelessness is supportive housing. And without those units, they cannot continue to rebuild their lives. So whether it's mental health supports, addiction supports, jobs, purpose, connection to community starts with that housing first model. So all that to say, our municipalities are really feeling the load of the financial cost of responding to homelessness. And as we know, our budgets cannot run a deficit. We have to balance our budgets. And really, municipal budgets were designed a very, very long time ago, when really what we were doing is managing roads and sewers and picking up garbage, and very basic. And so there's a lot of polarization and pressure on municipal governments to go back to basics and the core services. And that horse has left the barn, right? We can't put that genie back in the bottle. So we have to be able to modernize the fiscal framework that municipalities have in order to respond to emerging crises related to homelessness in our communities. And so we're really advocating for what we're calling the municipal growth framework. And it's a way to really tie funding from federal government directly to municipalities. While we appreciate these programs require a lot of negotiation with provinces. It's very complicated. We have one federal government, but we have many different provincial governments trying to work deals with each one. And at the end of the day, this crisis is really worsening in municipalities and home communities without a lot of options. So we really want to focus on creating a funding stream that is directly to municipalities, because at the end of the day, we are the ones responding real time, encampments popping up, sanitation services, being able to get people access to showers, bathrooms, things like that in programs. Food security goes with homelessness, so it's not just housing. Oftentimes people, if they are struggling to be in stable housing or they can't access it, they also have food insecurity and other co-occurring challenges. So municipalities trying to respond to that. So really, municipal growth framework is where we're saying we need to challenge the assumptions in the existing municipal fiscal framework and modernize so that we can really respond to these real-time challenges in our communities.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's really insightful. And I think the municipal perspective on this is so critical. In so many jurisdictions across our country, municipalities are on the front line of responding to homelessness and housing insecurity and all the compounding issues that go along with it. So, I mean, we have a couple other questions, but I'm wondering if we just turn it over to you folks at this stage. I think, and maybe just to build off of this question around like what would really move the dial for you folks. I don't know. I know some of the folks in the room, but not all of you. But thinking about, whether you're a community service provider representing a municipality or a level of government, where do you feel the investment needs to be going? What are some of the things that you need, our friends from representing municipalities and the federal government to know about what would move the dial on addressing long-term affordability and homelessness for the long term? I think it'd be great to hear from you folks. Yes, please. And we'll repeat your question up here just so you know, because there's...
I was going to also address back this way because
Please.
I've been in too many rooms now. I'm talking.
You're cranking your neck. Yeah, I get it.
So let me introduce myself first. I'm Eric Tusking and I'm living in Sackville, New Brunswick. Okay? I'm representing here the Catherine Donnelly Foundation, which is one of the national associations or foundations that supports housing across one of the funders for this event actually. But I'm also here with another hat on, and that's as a full president of our housing cooperative that we're developing in Sackville, New Brunswick. So I want to speak to the latter, but I've got that other context in mind as well. So we've started addressing housing in our area. Sackville, New Brunswick, for those who don't know, is about 6,000 to 7,000 people, rural community by all standards, except it's got a university in it, which makes the rents go up like this. Same thing for Acadia University in Wolfville, same thing for Antigonish with St. X. So our rents are really high for the people who generally live there. When the students come in, they go up like this. When the professors come in, it goes up like this. So our rents are really, so data is a real problem for us because it's new. So when we made our recent application for a cooperative housing fund, they said, well, your data's not accurate. We said, well, we think it's accurate because we've done the research in our community, but you're getting data from Moncton and from the other rural communities in the project. Doesn't work. So data is a real problem for us. One of the other things is capital funds. When we purchased our land, we had to go to our community in order to purchase the land. We had to come up with 1/3 of the funds. The other funds came from our credit union and from St. John Community Loan Fund, now called Clyde School, which CMAC, I think, helped support. I think one of the ones, I don't know, it administers some funds for us. But that's a problem because we didn't have those funds available. We were fortunate to find the social capital to knock on a few doors and get it. So capital funding is a real problem in our community, and I think that's true in most of the Maritimes. Community bonds, some of you may have been to the seminar that was on that yesterday, that is a possible solution. Possible, and hope that it can be done nationally, because it's never been used, as far as I know, in Atlantic Canada. It's been used in Ontario. The more concerning thing is capacity. When we developed our co-op 2 years ago, we had 100% volunteers. We meet weekly as a board of directors and then work in between to get all the tasks done. And now we made an application after 3 months into the cooperative housing program. It was incredible what work went into it, but we had dedicated people to help us do this. We didn't have any capacity. It's all done by volunteers. So capacity development of the Canadian Federation for Housing Cooperatives is really critical. I know that they are just hiring 7 people. The Atlantic Canada group is just coming up to speed on that, and I'll speak a bit about that, the whole Atlantic area in a second. The other one is the construction trade. I was a member of a worker cooperative that built houses, so I know that trade. We helped form a cooperative that's builds very quality, energy efficient housing. We cannot find carpenters to fill that cooperative now, and it may cease to exist because of that. So we need people in a concerted effort, collaborating with the provinces to say, we're going to continue to fund housing, so you're going to have a job, so go into the trades. That type of approach is necessary for us because we can't attract people into that in our town because they just won't, they'll stay in Moncton. They don't even come to us. So that's another part. One of the pieces that's fairly new, and I want to share this with everybody, is that the cooperative community is coming together in Atlantic Canada. And we've worked with the Cooperative Foundation, the Cooperative Center in St. John's, with Christy Murray and others, to develop an online webinar with people who are interested in various forms of housing, but cooperative housing in particular, say, okay, what's the ecosystem in Atlantic Canada that you can be part of and contribute to and also make use of for developing housing? Because CHF Canada only maintained cooperatives up until 2 years ago. When we formed our cooperative, it was dependent upon us to do all the strategic planning stuff because they didn't know how to do it. They never developed a cooperative, and I know this is true for Saskatchewan too, because I also was involved with a conversation up there. They hadn't developed a cooperative for 30 to 40 years. Mm-hmm. So they had no experience of it. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, there were co-op developers who worked in other sectors who could come in and work with us. But that's another piece, is that we need to develop that ecosystem and knowledge about it. So if anybody wants to be involved in that conversation about what's available out there for cooperative housing and low-income housing, affordable housing, please be in touch with me and I'll share my information with people to do that. So things are positive and I'm really encouraged by this, but we've got a long way to go.
Thanks so much for that, Eric. So many. I was like, how do I summarize this for those that are listening virtually? I'm going to quickly just point out a few things there, and then I'll bop it back over to our panelists if anyone would like to respond. So first of all, your comments around data. I know that's such a massive issue in Newfoundland and Labrador as well, and I'll invite Doug maybe in a moment to speak a little bit to the incredible work that End Homelessness St. John's is leading around data collection in St. John's. And also when we think outside of the metro region of our province, it's how you calculate the homeless population, how you make a case for the needs. It's a massive challenge, and even being able to kind of do your housing needs assessment in a timely manner in order to access the funding that is also time bound can sometimes be challenging. Also certainly hearing the point around the need and the challenges in accessing capital funding and, the opportunity for us to really think, I think at the federal level in particular, around community bonds as an area that we could look to invest in, specifically for the development of community housing. And then certainly connected to that, Eric, you also talked about the construction trade and, in order to build more housing, we need more trade workers, and how do we invest in that pipeline? What does that look like? How do we make sure we have enough workers to build the housing? And then, of course, you touched on the opportunity around very rightfully touched on the opportunity around cooperative housing, which I believe you also referenced to in terms of the ways in which the federal government is investing in that. So maybe, Doug, I don't know if you wanted to maybe touch on some of the data pieces or anything else that Eric mentioned, then we can turn it back over to our panelists for any comments.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks for the questions. I totally forgot that we were going to have to repeat them because you just keep going. I kept making notes of the themes. But for us on the data side, it's so important, right? Because you can't really improve upon a system, whether it's a housing or a homeless system, without quality and accurate data. And one of the things that we've taken as an organization and as a community is to take a system planning role, using Reaching Home as our primary source of funding to deliver on those core objectives like implementation of HIFIS and coordinated access. But without that system planning role, it's really difficult to work with dozens of organizations who are providing frontline services to get accurate and true data. And data sharing amongst the nonprofit sector is not really a common practice, right? So how we go about that is really tricky and sensitive. But it's the only way that we can get better at our advocacy efforts, right? If we have a coordinated system working together and we have great data and accurate data, quality data that can inform our efforts and our requests, that's the way we have to do it. And there's not a whole lot of system planning work going on. There's like lead organizations that often will deliver on the federal government through Reaching Home's objectives, but it's really difficult with the amount of money that Reaching Home puts in to coordinate all of the service delivery because provinces and municipalities control contribute so much. And just, in Atlantic Canada, the designated communities are all nonprofit organizations, but the provincial governments are the ones that administer the shelter system. So even information sharing between us as community entities with provincial government become very, very tricky. And so we are hoping to get more federal leadership on that front, because it's difficult for me as an ED of an organization to go to a provincial government and say, you should really share this information with us. There's no incentive for them to do that. Because they know we're going to use the data to advocate for more resources, right? So it's a game in that sense, but the consequences are lives that are not getting the supports and services that are desperately needed. So that's how we do it in St. John's, that system planning entity role, and that's how we collect data as a community, and we feel good about talking about it as a system in that context, not just trying to get organization A, B, C sharing data that may or may not be accurate. So that's how we go about doing it. And my colleagues in the back, I think Jennifer is there, can speak way more articulately to all of the nuances of the data collection. But that's how we've undertaken it in our community.
Thanks for that, Doug. Rebecca, Janet, would either of you like to respond to anything that kind of Eric raised in his comments?
Go ahead. Respond after.
Okay, no, thanks. And I think some really important issues. I was just thinking about all of those things. I guess I would say on data, absolutely agree on the importance of data. And as I just heard, it's very important through reaching home, and it's a very big priority for us. Interesting thing to consider, though, Doug, in terms of getting provinces to share data with community entities. I do think we have a really great model happening in BC. Although it's been a struggle to get it in place, but I do think once it's in place, it will be a model that we could think about across the country, whereby we'll have a provincial instance of HIFIS, and they are working through right now all of the tricky issues around information sharing. But I do think the province there has very much recognized the value of data, and that they need data too, right? They need data from the community, and the community needs data from the province, and so really kind of working through those thorny issues. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to share and expand and engage in that conversation more broadly, so happy to do that. We did talk about the CHF. I heard your message around lack of capacity, but we have invested to help them invest in capacity, so we are hoping that will help. And with the new cooperative housing program that CMHC is administering, it is sort of based loosely on the concept of 1/3 contribution, 2/3 loan. I know it depends on the application, but that's sort of the conceptual design there. So hopefully that will help on the capital issue. On the trades and labor mobility, absolutely hear you. In fact, I can hear Minister Fraser saying the same thing to me as I listen to you talk. We are really engaged with our colleagues at Employment and Social Development Canada to think about skills training, to think about how we can be more focused in this space. And in fact, there is work in that space, but lots more capacity needed. And I absolutely agree on, maybe we need something as sort of, I won't say basic, but as kind of obvious as a marketing campaign to kids, to say these are really great jobs, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be thinking about the trades, because they're great, well paid, steady, all of these great things. So anyways, I'll stop there and turn it over to Rebecca.
Thanks very much. It's such a packed question / offering, so thank you for that. I'll just keep going along the job skills training side. I think that is a critical piece of what we're talking about here, because so often we do talk about homelessness in a bit of a siloed conversation, and what we all recognize in day-to-day lives is we get up, we go to work, we connect with folks there, we find purpose, what have you, and then we're able to come home and pay for the roof over our head, even if it is tough at times, and food on the table, etc. So for folks who see themselves wanting to break the cycle of homelessness, this is actually an important piece. And so there's an opportunity to actually engage folks who are struggling in homelessness, who may, because we hear about this all the time, particularly in Vancouver. We had an encampment, and I remember very able gentleman that I spoke to in the encampment, and it was kind of like, how did you get here? because it was clear he had recently fallen into homelessness, and he said that he had had hard times. He was from a different province. He lost his kids. And he kind of got the advice, go to BC, they're really nice to you there. Literally his words, quote, not mine. So it's anecdotal, but he said, but then I just couldn't sort of get started, and before I knew it, I was homeless. And then getting out of that is so hard because it's hard to find a job. You can't shower, you need to go to work. So, it really stayed with me. I also think we have to bring into this conversation as the opportunity as well is around newcomers. To Canada, because we're actually finding more and more newcomers accessing homelessness services. And there are some amazing job skills training organizations in Vancouver that are focused on connecting with newcomers to help them get up to speed on just what it means to live in BC, Vancouver, and Canada from wherever they came from, and help them positively integrate into communities through work. So huge opportunity. And then I think on the co-op side, we've been really interested in the community land trust models, so sort of to put the powers back in the community's hands when it comes to responding to homelessness, and particularly around, there's an amazing organization called the SRO Collaborative. SROs for us, single room occupancy. And what they do is they engage with tenants. They empower tenants. What they find in the buildings where they run programs is that there's less conflict between tenants. So there's less police calls because people are struggling to sort of cohabitate in close proximity, share bathrooms, what have you. They paint each other's units. They take care as opposed to feeling like alone, isolated, and really hopeless around their situation. So these are the small moves, but the community land trust model is something that they're really focusing on, and they've been given money from the provincial government and have a proven record now of being able to manage that in a way that stabilizes our most sort of at-risk supportive housing units so that the crisis is not worsening while we can invest some of these federal dollars into programs. So it's about the short, medium, and long-term solutions so that we can build self-contained, dignified units of housing, because eventually these buildings won't be able to, be habitated. They're too old, right? But in the meantime, we cannot afford to lose those units without creating new ones. So there has to be that sort of connection between the work we're doing. So,
yeah, I just wanted to touch on the conversation around the trades and sort of just think about workforce development more broadly in the sector, especially in the housing and homeless serving sector. For folks who've got, are around with frontline organizations know like the burnout is real, and I worry, strategically in the long term that all the work that communities are being asked to take on, community organizations are asked to take on, are under-resourced, underfunded. Frontline workers have really become first-line responders, and we don't acknowledge it in that way either. So it's not just on the building side; it's on the services and support side. And as those needs intensify, the challenge of maintaining your labor is going to be really critical. And how do we think about that in a national context, right? Because communities, organizations are the ones being divested the work too, without the resources to get the work done effectively and support their staff in delivering it. And that has, real implications in the immediate, but also, downstream. Where does the next group of leaders coming from? Where are the next group of experts coming from? And what are the consequences, 5, 10, 15 years from now when the sector is just churned through everybody who would have kind of moved up through the sector to deliver on that. So I think it's a national issue more broadly than just trades. It's also the frontline service. I just wanted to acknowledge that because it's something that I think a lot about these days, but we're not seeing a lot of movement on.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic, and I know there's been some conversations kind of flowing through the dialogue over the last couple of days around the role of social enterprise as a method to, as many of you now alluded to, provide valuable employment opportunities to our most vulnerable and also contribute to the economic development across the country. So some really interesting themes there. Other comments or questions or suggestions? Yeah, go ahead, in the blue blazer, and then back here, yeah.
Hi, Stefan Michel. I'm with the Community Housing Transformation Center based out of Halifax. Prior to joining the center about a year and a half ago, I spent more than a decade working on housing with the government of Nova Scotia. I know a little bit about housing in the context of Nova Scotia, but also work with colleagues across the region. Also want to make my point quickly, but Rebecca, thank you for talking about this SRO collaborative project. This is a project that the Centre has funded. Very pleased with that work, and CMHC and the federal government deserves a shout out for that, because the Centre's funded from the federal government. So this shows that there's a lot of initiative that the federal government funds and supports that people don't really see or know about because it's through third-party organizations like the Centre. So just wanted to provide or give credit where credit is due. I also like your point around housing. If we're serious about homelessness, this is a bit of a disappointment for me with this conference. At the same time, we need to talk about homelessness and all the support required in talking about the individual, like the tenants. But housing is the solution, and we need to do whatever we can to increase supply. On that point, and I didn't consult with Eric, but I'm glad Eric raised all the points he did, because I also agree in the context of Atlantic Canada, capacity building is critical. I would say that what I've observed from Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, recently through partnership with the Centre on creating a community housing growth fund, recognizing capacity is important, but also if we're serious about supply, we've seen that CMHC seed funding, which is so critical to come up with new projects and support new projects, there's been a lot of uncertainty around the funding, and so pre-development, planning and pre-development investment are so critical. And in Nova Scotia, we've seen over the last 2.5 years how important or impactful pre-development can be. Even with pre-development support or seed money and this investment, I think where we struggle a lot, and if we're really serious about growing the stock of non-market housing, we need to find a better solution than asking organizations to be creative and knock on a dozen different doors to get their funding for a project in this kind of project by project and funding program by funding program. It's just not working. It's a good example of what's working is Rapid Housing Initiative, where you come in with 100% of the capital, and you're like, okay, where's the land available? Partners come in quickly and get these projects done in 18. This probably is not a long-term solution, because there's limits to government resources, so that's understandable. But one thing that the Centre is now embarking on a conversation and a study in the Atlantic region is looking at what are some of the creative financial models that could be available to organizations and really streamline kind of this access. And I like the point around kind of government levels working together. But right now, it's very, very difficult for housing providers to apply for one program, but then they need to make sure that the provincial program aligns with that. And now with Housing Accelerator Fund, municipalities are involved in that equation, and they're trying to figure out how to align their funding. So this is, for me, I think the opportunity is there. There's never been more funding available and more support by government than other players, but Atlantic Canada doesn't have access to big foundation or social impact investors like in other regions. So we are sort of constrained to, at least that's what we believe. The work that we're doing is going to help us kind of uncover potential solutions. But maybe for the panel, kind of your thoughts on kind of maybe looking at different financial mechanisms or ways to fund programs, because asking organizations to find the equity, there's just nobody available, and I believe some organizations have good community or generous communities.
Can I start?
You can't raise millions of dollars.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and just thank you so much for that. I just want to share a quick example of where we're seeing this in Vancouver. We have a really unique opportunity, but I'm hearing it across the country, Ontario as well, is around church land. And so this is land that we have right across the country We've got faith-based groups that own that land. Their facilities are deteriorating. They need to renew. They don't have the budget to do that. There's a shared common good social license to be building affordable housing. And so from a municipality perspective, we're saying, let's not let these sites get so desperate that they become vulnerable to a market developer writing a check and letting them out of their issues, because that's not what they want. But sometimes we're seeing they don't have any other choice. And so you touched on pre-development, and it's such, like, the pre-development funding and then the construction financing that they can access. In the middle, you've got a municipality that is responsible to go as quickly as possible, because that pre-development funding is only going to last so long. And then I had just one project, and they couldn't get it through because we couldn't decide what to do with a tree, literally. And there was 800 units of social housing on the hook, and they were running out of money, that the whole project would just fold and collapse. So there is something here. I don't have the solution. I just really wanted to underscore what you're talking about, because right now I'm talking about church land, but it could be co-ops need redeveloping. It could be something else. And so we do have to become alive to what is actually the on-the-ground issues that are holding up a lot of these projects, so that whether it is, I don't know that the Rapid Housing Initiative gets best bang for the buck, I must say. Certainly not in Vancouver. That money had to be spent very quickly, and there were hotels we bought for way too much, and so it wasn't sustainable, and just being pretty blunt and transparent. But it was during COVID, and it had to happen, right? But so I think the reaching home and making that permanent and really making that a very strong fund that we can access. So whether it's church land, we need to partner with folks in the community that want to do this development, that own the land, that need a good partner, that need a good funding program, and then everyone needs to kind of get out of the way and let it happen as quickly as possible for the sort of common goal that below market units of housing, especially while we're putting so much pressure on building market housing, middle income housing, missing middle housing, whatever you want to call it in your community. Like, the risk is that, especially in Vancouver, all of that housing is deeply affordable, but because we're in a peninsula and we're both on coasts, us and you and I, right, that we're going to run out of land. So then what becomes vulnerable is the most affordable housing gets purchased and redeveloped into the new market housing, because the density is there. So we got to be moving faster on these pieces, but I really appreciate what you say. And just personal plug, I'm coming to your province, to Halifax, on November 28th. Would love to continue the conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll just speak briefly to two other programs. So I already mentioned the capacity building that we're trying to inject into the cooperative housing space, but maybe I could talk just a little bit about sort of Canada Builds or too, in terms of the concept. And again, I think it's the concept that we have that we're working with BC on is just to try and solve a little bit of that, putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. So getting back to your point, like, one level of government, there's not enough federal money, provincial money, public money to buy our way out of the housing crisis, right? Like, we need to bring sort of all partners together. And so one of the really big benefits of the BC Builds arrangement will be that when a developer comes to BC through their programming, they will do the due diligence, and then it will just flow through CMHC and the money will flow back out. So trying to kind of also get that, what it does do is it gives the government of BC more control over what gets approved, which is a good thing for them, but it also speeds it up for the developer, right? So it's not like apply to BC, and then if you get your money there, then you can apply to CMHC, and then if you can put all of these things together in a timely way, which is key word there, in a timely way, you're good to go, right? So it's meant to kind of really bring that much closer and sort of create a lot more certainty in that space. So that kind of arrangement is something that we want to talk to every jurisdiction about. So in Atlantic Canada, we are talking with every province about, what are the opportunities for us to streamline, work together, leverage our joint programming. So I've talked about the programming that the federal government has, but each of your provinces has different programming as well. And is there a way for us to bring that closer together so that you don't have to always piece it together? And then I guess the other program I wanted to talk about really briefly is the Canada Rental Protection Fund. So this fund was also announced in Budget 2024, and we are currently in program design phase, and we hope to be able to launch it very soon. But I guess what I would say is we have heard very clearly the issue of capacity and also the piecing together the capital stack to make an acquisition something that can move quickly with some certainty. And so the idea behind the fund, it's a $1.5 billion fund, $500 million in contribution funding, $1 billion in low interest loan funding. But the idea is to identify a sector-led professional investment manager that would be able to access that funding, but not just access the funding, but do the role of the aggregator and the capital stack, right? Like, so, and that might not be enough, right? Like that might not, I anticipate that won't be the only source of funds, but there will be this access to this funding through the investment manager, as well as perhaps though needing the other pieces of the capital stack that's really important when you're thinking about affordable rental and acquisitions, right? So there may need to be other contribution funding coming from another level of government or a municipality or a different program, but part of the role that we hope this investment manager will take on will be that aggregator to kind of say, to move it more quickly. So I guess I would just say, and that's only one program, it's focused on acquisition, but we hear you, right? Like we hear that really consistently and are trying to do what we can to work in that space.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for your comments and for the excellent comment and question as well.
The person in the back. Yeah, the lady.
Yes, yeah, for sure. No, thank you. And we have, I'll just like put it out there just kind of to mull over, because I think the piece around, how do various levels of government work together in a more streamlined way so that agencies and municipalities can build housing more quickly. If there are examples from the room around instances where you've seen that work quite well that you might be able to share, I think there's a lot for us to learn on that front as well. Yeah, I'd love to go for you right in the back row there.
My name is Shelby Zika. I'm executive director for Canadian Association in PBI. I have the 50 thoughts. So compliments. We manage 250 units of housing. We have about 11 properties that we've been doing housing since 1984, so 40 years for CHC. I want to just touch on a few things too in comments. So one of the pieces around why we're sort of in this crisis now. CHC was investing in bricks and mortar up until 1993, and then there's no new investment in bricks and mortar until 2018. So they kicked that can so far down the road that that's why we're part of why we're in that crisis now. Speaking to the issue of labor, I know PBI, for every 10 people retiring, there's only 7 people coming into the workforce. So you lose people, so you're losing corporate knowledge, you're losing skilled trades, you're losing that. So you're also losing some of that capacity. So that's an issue that we're all going to be sort of struggling with. Hand in hand with that is wage. So we, and as you mentioned, staff burnout and whatever. So we, and Andrew would speak to too with another group a minute ago in PBI, we lose staff to the province because the pay scale is so big. And in 1985 or 1987, when I left university, employment was 25% for youth. We weren't fussy about a job. We took it. We were happy to have a job. So people now, young people, they have the world's their oyster with the right skill sets. They have choice. So it's harder to recruit and to retain people. And they have to really love what they're doing and where they want to be and have that commitment. And lots of people don't stay with an organization necessarily for 30 years. I hope that some of our newer staff will stay for 30 years, but that's a challenge. So I'm going to have comments and then a question. Rapid housing. So we did actually have some rapid housing funding. We built a 28 unit property. It's space for support staff around that. The government gave us money to buy, provincially, to buy land through Farm Bill Speak to the end. Got the housing money, and of course, building through COVID, as you said, there was some cost issues around that. It's supposed to be, there's supposed to be an equity portion that you have to put in yourself. It's usually around that sort of 15%, or 10% is manageable. One issue with that program that we're running into right now is because of some cost overruns on that, we had a line of credit to build that property. We can't encumber the property because of the forgivable portion for 20 years. So technically, I'm trying to move through the chain now. Do I have to wait until we've been 2 years? Do I have to wait another 18 years to encumber that property? We're paying the interest on the line of credit, but I can't put a mortgage on so that I'm paying part principal and part interest. So technically, we won't get ahead. So we're trying to put that through and put it up the food chain. So we're just going to have a down the road, but so that's an issue around some of the things around that. So capacity building and knowledge to do that. A lot of NGOs, when they're trying to, or being asked to provide housing, provide support, typically the leadership in an NGO, particularly a smaller NGO, comes from someone who worked as a frontline. They have a background in social services, social supports. Probably not a business background. The passion for people doing this work, not necessarily that. So they don't always have the expertise to know what that looks like and to take on and to build projects. So unless you have some really good board members who have that expertise to help run you through that, or you have someone who comes into that role with a business background, they're going to struggle with knowing how to manage and build. They might say, oh, we can do the supports front. We're not going to build it. We don't know how to do that. We're not going to get into it. So capacity building or supports that type of work, and even knowing what we have, plot plan, survey, environmental assessment, geotech, all those things are all important to build, but if you don't have that knowledge, you don't know what you're really missing. So, and municipalities, I think what I've seen here in presentations, bigger centers, they're heavily involved in infrastructure and housing. They have the capacity. They own properties all over the place. I think in most land, except for maybe the HRM, most municipalities, they don't build anything, but they do set roads and sewers. They don't own buildings. They might build a art station. That's about it, which is a warehouse. So they're not necessarily, they don't have the capacity to do that either. They don't. The PEI, our municipality, is Charlton, a little bit better than Summerside. They're been kind of, excuse me, you happen to know people, but they're sort of kicking and screaming into sort of dealing with housing and what that looks like. And it's unfortunate that there's that piece, because if there wasn't pressure from trying to create from what became a warming center to a community outreach center and going through that process, they wouldn't even be involved except for the fact that the complaints that from visibility and location. So those are some of the challenges I think that small municipalities have. They don't have the capacity, and they don't necessarily have the skills, and in some cases they don't have the interest.
Yeah.
And if you're not a designated community with reaching home, you also don't have that support around data and point in time permission and all that kind of stuff. So just wondering if in terms of the federation for capacity building for some of the smaller municipalities from the ones who do have them, certainly Ottawa and other areas, Calgary, have lots of capacity to share with their fellow colleagues in other communities. And is there any sort of opportunity for them to access not just the knowledge, but some money around that for them to bring them into the field? But then, and I have more, so I'll just speak.
Yeah, I'll just be really brief, and I might even ask if it's okay. Our FCM staff, Sherry, is here as well, but just to say thank you for the call to action, actually, in that question, because housing is becoming
it has always been a big priority of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, but because of what I said at the beginning, it is actually at the top of the list now for folks right across the country in terms of elected. You're not wrong about what you pointed out in terms of all the barriers, including lack of interest. And we know that that is shifting, albeit slowly in smaller communities. But we do represent 92% of the population in communities of all size. Communities of 200 people all the way to the biggest cities. So the breadth is there. We have an annual conference every year where we do incredible workshop learning environment opportunities like that as well. So keep that on your radar for the spring. And now, Sherry, maybe you can add a couple things that FCM is focusing on.
The capacity building piece is really key, and we have seen a lot of best practices across the country that, why we need them to show how do we actually know more about. I think one of the challenges you encounter is somebody that works in one jurisdiction might not work in another municipal authorities or provincial act and so on. So one of the things that we are actually actively looking to do is to where we have the green municipal funds, with which we do a lot of best practice sharing in conferences. We're actually starting to look at ideas on how we create a municipal center of housing excellence so that we could have people across the country. This is a certain thing we're starting to develop a proposal. We'd like to start talking to CBHC and others. There are things like the short-term rental enforcement fund. There are municipalities across the country doing work. Hopeful that perhaps we could be working with the federal government on doing some best practice sharing capacity building around that as a first step to demonstrate what we could do. But there's a lot of aspiration at FCM to build that expertise. We're at conferences like this, we go municipal staff, talking to municipal staff, but no offense to my president here, but how do you get city councils to be UBs instead of NIMBYs sometimes? If you're at Canadian Institute of Planners, you may be with planners from all sorts of different consulting firms, but not how do you advance, streamline within your municipality based on other things. So if we can create pieces of practice, if we can take best practices and share them and do that due diligence. I serve for the City of Toronto, so we would look at really great best practices across the country. Look at the renovation policy in New Westminster. City's biggest Toronto, I was researching it, trying to figure it out. Then I get the legal team that did not have capacity to see how we could actually do that within the rental tenancy act in Ontario. But if FCM could do that work and then give a template policy, this is the way I would work in PEI, so work in Nova Scotia. These are the little tweaks, and by the way, here's your template you can take, fill in the blanks, and take to council. These are that work on some policies at FCM, but we're looking to kind of pitch that and how you take the housing accelerated fund best practices and it goes across the country to more interesting.
Yeah.
So it's a dream we have. Stay tuned. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I support the dream.
Just a couple more things. One of the things too is I know that with, because of the success we had with the rapid housing project, and I hope there is more funding coming out that we would like to see. I know we were in the first round, I think there was, they had $500 million to give it was $4.5 billion acting at state when they first got, and that was in voting. I think about 6 weeks to put a proposal together. Like, that's also a bit of a ridiculous timeline, just from an NGO not having that support. We had support from our provincial government who said, we want you to be able, would you be interested, can you access this? We can give you someone who can help you with the application. Because literally, had you do to Senator Rogers. So you already lost 2 weeks from that. So again, some of the timing on some of that stuff too is also, needs to make maybe a little bit more sense. That's just sorry, just as a note to tuck away. But with the reaching home, is there, I'm not sure what the additional funding is, but is there money in there for capacity building for individuals? Because we did access a little bit of that from another project that we did. We did another 10-unit project in rural communities, so we did access some from that, but it was COVID money. So I'm just wondering if there's public money for capacity building in the reaching home.
So in terms of capacity building for housing, no, but there is the capacity, the CCI stream, the community. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So in addition, so under Reaching Home, there is the Community Innovation and Capacity Stream. I think I got the name wrong, CCI. Natasha will correct me. But that stream is really meant for capacity building for the community entity to implement coordinated access and HIFIS, right? So it's very kind of focused on the program and the transformational shift that we're trying to make in data in that particular space. In terms of capacity building, though, for housing, like I said, it kind of depends on the program. So it's a little bit built into the new cooperative program. It will be built into the new Canada Rental Protection Fund. But when you're thinking about rapid housing, there will be a new rapid housing stream under the Affordable Housing Fund that will launch in November. CMHC is preparing to launch that. But that new stream has a similar kind of feel to the Rapid Housing Initiative in that it is up to 100% contribution funding. I'd have to confirm whether or not the sort of planning capacity piece is part of that, just to be sure, so I can circle back on that. But I guess I would say too that new substream is very much focused on shelters, transitional housing, supportive housing, and so again, it's really important to have the support and buy-in from your province because it's the capital piece, but those operating and wraparound supports are critical in every one of those scenarios. So really important to have that together. And so let me just circle back on that capacity building though under the new substream.
I do want to comment on what you mentioned about that housing. Like, yes, you're unhoused, you need to be housed. That's kind of, but for most people that find themselves in that situation, they do need continual to get to that independent housing and the wraparound support. So
That's right.
federally, yes, there's money there at bricks and mortar now, which is amazing, and there's never been more money, I don't think, available for that in my mind. But it's getting the support for the staffing to be able to support individuals and how much you can access for that. And that's a critical problem. That's a critical piece. And like you said, the provinces only have so much too, but the investment in that now saves so much danger on the road because those people are housed. They do have service. They may be on income support, but they're not hitting police, they're not hitting MERS, they're not hitting the hospital, the psychiatric facility. So it makes up the space for people who actually do need those services. So that's a big challenge too, is to have that. I mean, we're lucky in PPI because we're small. We have good relationships with the players and we can make those asks. I wouldn't want to do my job in Ontario because I feel like that would just be like trying to call out over 12 people to get to the person who I talk to. And in the Maritimes, we know it's a little easier. You can probably see here in LA, it's so easy. So, but the one piece I'll end on a positive piece, I think, for our province is 2018, before COVID. Happened just before Easter weekend, which was at the end of March. This literally happened in a week. They had some money left over. They reached out to our organization for the housing. They said, we want to keep this money. We don't want to go back and probably not buy to offer housing, but we don't have to do it. This idea worked. And so they wanted to create a fund that people, entities could apply to for some housing and what would that look like. And we hold the money as a community entity in conjunction with the province, and then have partners, private sector, as part of a committee that would administer that fund. And so they put $3 million in. So conversation came on Thursday, met with their key board member on Friday, because they reached out to him on Monday. We had a meeting with the province on Wednesday and sending them the invoice on Thursday before Good Friday and Monday.
Wow.
That wouldn't happen in Ontario, I don't think. But anyway, so with that fund, they put $3 million in each year successively after that. We've committed $8 million to $12 million that are in that fund through people on housing. So capacity building portion for people to explore what their needs are in the community. So Eric, for your situation, would be for you to say, hey, how do we get some of this data we need? Instead of your team, you need a new team, and the parents will be able to do some of that work. We also have up to $10,000. There's up to $50,000 for professional fees, same thing, working on that. And then up to $1 million in construction costs. The construction costs up to 30%, all the other ones are 75% contributions. And for straight up for the first two straights, the construction participated. So it's a really good investment. We've had initially, they were all NGOs applying for funding, and we've had 3 builds complete since that time frame because it took a little bit of time, people with application in, and of course COVID hit, people waited, it took time to build. But then we've had now some private developers and working with them, figured out, okay, well, if they want to apply for have some affordable housing, now they're gonna have to manage, they have to keep the rents at a certain amount. Oh, you wouldn't even have to income test people, what kind of, I'm not comfortable with that, and maybe this one isn't for you, but how do we get to more people to, I think other provinces could do a similar thing, put some money in and then take your people from the community who have an interest in working towards that. So it has made a difference because you're leveraging federal funds, maybe a different provincial fund, or a municipal fund. This is a provincial fund. So it's just another avenue. And the key thing in negotiating is that when we got the money, that was negotiated. Well, any interest we are not back comes to us. It's a good option. The interest, we said, well, yeah, we're going to have to take care of the money, so we're not going to put it in penny stocks or something, but we are going to manage it. So it's a good opportunity. But there was a trust relationship there to do that, and we had great support from the province and from the private sector partners who were part of that. So just as an idea that's sort of put in there, that there's an opportunity to move money from the province into a different way. They can still have some input and guidance because they're the ones who are, of course, people are coming to for their other programs as well. So this is a, and it's up to kids.
That's great. It's a great call.
Yeah, Rebecca, and then we'll go over to Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll just say that it's what I was saying about the community land trust model actually earlier. There are folks with proven track records who can do this a lot better than government. I'm in government, so I feel like I can say that. And the complicated part can be government to government to government negotiation. So if we could just empower under a MOU or whatever needs to be sort of legally in place for organizations who are actually accountable to their communities and to their residents to be able to have a greater impact. I really think we could move the needle on this crisis. And I'll say that with one caveat. There are housing operators in our city that do incredible work with their tenants and their organizations and the communities. And like anything, there are some that don't. And so, it's not as easy as just everybody should be given this opportunity. I think there has to be some sort of threshold, but I think there's more great than not, and we should be looking at more flexible models. Multi-unit residential acquisition fund is a fund that's managed the City of Toronto. I'd love to see that in Vancouver because we have a community land trust in the downtown east side that could do the work that you're describing, and then the province already works with them, and then the federal government could work with them, and the municipality knows them, but they're the convener, as opposed to the government being the convener. And then, as you say, private market doesn't want to give any more money to the government. They just don't. But you know what they want to do? They want to say, you know what? We donated $3 million to this project, and now we can see it.
Yeah.
And we can see it in our communities. And so I think there's an incredibly powerful thing that you're talking about, and I believe we'll hear more and more about these conversations, but thank you for articulating that so well. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your comments and questions as well, and I was taking notes from what you were saying, and I want to learn more about that funding that you folks are administering. I think the comment around ultimately it's innovative, easy to access funding that removes the red tape. So kudos to you folks for kind of acting as the backbone there. We only have a few moments remaining, so I'm going to go over to you, Jennifer, for your question or comment.
Like you, I don't like having to Yeah, I just wanted to shout out Jen and Doug for putting this together and for you for joining us. It feels like, being in the Atlantic region, like sometimes the region home model does feel a little Ontario-centric. And like Doug said, it's rare to have purpose-built system planning organizations, but honestly, after working in one for the last 4 years, I can't imagine doing this work in any other way because it gives us so much ability for leadership and advocacy and accountability. And like you mentioned, PC housing, which has been extremely effective in getting where they want to go. I do remember when they were going through it, and I was just saying to some of my colleagues in the actual communities in BC, and they were like pretty upset about it at the time, right? Because it was such a top-down approach compared to the typical reaching home, which is very much, bottom-up community-driven approach. Like, it was very painful to watch them have to go through it. I was like, I'm so sorry. And I even said to our colleagues at NL Housing, I was like, don't you dare pull BC Housing on us, because it's not going to be great. But they haven't, thank goodness. But in any case, like what we've seen in other provinces, BC Housing has that collective. There's the 7 cities in Alberta. Of course, there's tons of communities across Ontario doing this work. Same with Quebec. I'm not sure what's happening in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. They've got their own thing going on. But what I really love about this group is getting that kind of critical mass of communities to come together. Because sometimes it is lonely when we're St. John's, we're the biggest city and only community entity in the province. And it's just one voice, right? So being able to have voices like yours to lend to us so that we can actually say, okay, to your point, the municipalities sometimes don't see themselves in it. But we went to a presentation yesterday from the which is, similar population-wise to us. It's like, I think the municipalities need to see what it looks like. And this is here, like you said, they may not, just don't have an interest in it. But then when they see, okay, that's not so bad, it's not so scary, the other thing I was thinking was off of Stefan's comment, actually, when, we're asked to be creative, because sometimes when we hear, when people say, oh, be creative, it's almost like a code word for do more with less. Yeah, through all these hoops, and it's like Doug said earlier, I mean, you're dealing with a sector that's already super stretched. It hasn't grown a lot since COVID, even though the demand for our services has basically tripled. And when I hear that, I'm sometimes like, really? That's what you want us to do? So one of the things that we're doing, actually, Stefan, I know you're not the program manager for St. John's, but we're putting in grants applications to CHTC. What's the deadline of tomorrow? For exactly this, like capacity building, like data sector building, and community of practice, because it feels like we're all saying those same things, and just also, trying to do all the things in the moment, but like Doug said, also thinking about who are going to be the us sitting in this room in 10, 15 years. If we burn out our staff right now, where are they going to go? They'll all be working in government, and then the soul will be draining out of them all. Keep our own community sector happy and healthy and energized to be able to do this work now in the present to meet the present homelessness and housing crisis before us. But also, whatever that looks like in 10, 15 years. So that's my big wave. I don't even know if I have a real question. I just want to say thanks to all of you for putting it together. And looking forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for those comments. And I think you're absolutely right. The whole kind of impetus behind even just having this convening was to kind of share best practices across the region, but also to kind of work towards a bit of a shared voice across Atlantic, because I think that there's so many similarities when you look, whether it's Newfoundland, Labrador, PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, so much that we can learn from each other as well. So with just a couple moments remaining, perhaps I'll pass it back. Maybe I'll start with you, Janet, for any kind of final comments that you'd like to leave the group with.
No, thanks very much for the opportunity to be here. I think it's super helpful from my perspective at the federal level to just hear from you, hear the challenges, hear how things are working or not, and some really important takeaways for me in terms of the importance of data, the importance of capacity building in the sector for sure, the importance of trying to align and put the pieces of the puzzle together when we're thinking about our programming, and that's something that we are actively thinking about in terms of how we work with PTs, how we work with our community entities, and how we deliver the programming generally. So just thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Yes, thank you as well, and really great conversation, so thank you. It was very good to hear from everybody here. I think it's just important to underscore a few things that FCM is focusing on. So we've most recently run a campaign to identify that winter is coming,
and we need that encampment funding in our communities as soon as possible. So we are very grateful to the federal government for being such a strong partner on the files that we work on at FCM. And this particular one right now is a real call to action to get those dollars in our communities, as well as, and I mentioned it earlier, making Reaching Home a permanent fund. And I think there's, it's great. It's clearly providing some successful pathways to reducing homelessness. So we need to make sure that that we're able to just sort of stabilize, because once we can predict on that funding, organizations can staff up for it, they can plan for it, and that is the piece that really can move the needle. And we know that there is a number out there of $3.5 billion was the Parliamentary Budget Office number that said that if we wanted to address homelessness across the country, that's how much needs to be invested, and it's a very large number. And we're continuing to see more programs being introduced to address that. So we're going to continue to work at FCM until we have, together with our members and partners, to address homelessness. And we know that investments in supportive and deeply affordable housing is needed and sort of mission critical, let's call it. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. And with my panelists here, I learned a lot as well. So look forward to furthering the conversation soon.
Yeah, just thanks again, Janet. Thanks, Rebecca, for joining us. This is the second time we've run the AtlanticCaucus. It was a little bit fuller last year when the conference was in Halifax, but we hope to keep it going. We do, so many of the comments were part of the reasons why we felt, Jen and I, as board members of these national organizations, we need to bring this conversation to light. Capacity has always been the issue, it feels like. Yeah. And without acknowledging that and recognizing the unique needs in addressing that capacity, our regions are missing out on a lot of resources and dollars and cents. And, it's really important that we have a voice at that table. And so we hope the conversation continues, and we appreciate you joining us and sharing your insights and thoughts on this as well.